Hi everyone, welcome to Understanding Disability Around the World and the Global Disability Legislation Index. Welcome. I'm Sarah Clements. I'm Director of Engagement at the Valuable 500. Um, for an audio description for anyone that would prefer or needs that, I am a white woman in my 40s. I am also a wheelchair user, which you can't see on the Zoom screen. And just to indulge me for a second, it is Disability Pride Month. So happy Disability Pride to everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Um, so in terms of what we're going to go through, I'd like to give you a bit of an agenda of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to showcase the Global Disability Legislation Index and explain how organisations can access it. We're going to provide a practitioner perspective on putting the index to work. And we are going to explore a wider perspective for how this supports disability inclusion generally. I am joined today by Angela Vigil, Rachel Haynes, and Marcy Roth, three of my professional crushes, and it's just wonderful to have this webinar and discussion. Um, if I can start with a little bit of context about the index and some housekeeping, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So, in terms of the index, Valuable 500 shared this resource at 6:25 in Tokyo, in Japan, in December. I was very lucky to be joined by Angela and her colleague, and we actually did a live launch in Tokyo. And then it was launched to the wider um, open source in January this year. Essentially, it's the world's first comprehensive comparative guide to disability legislation. It looks at over 100 different countries, and it was developed through a landmark pro bono collaboration with Baker McKenzie, which is why they are kindly collaborating and co-hosting this webinar today. Um, so, a little bit of housekeeping from me before we launch in. The webinar is recorded. There will be a transcript and it will be circulated. So that's why I'm full makeup today. Um, there are AI captions, and you can also put your preferred language. For those of you who are joining us from corporate companies, if you look at the ribbon at the bottom and go to the More tab, there should be the button Show Captions, and um, that's how you should action that. We also have a Q&A function. Do put your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to work through them. Anything that we don't actually answer on the webinar, we will try and come to you afterwards. So do put the questions in there. And essentially, thank you for joining us for this conversation. I'm going to ask our panelists to do an introduction and audio description. So, Angela, would you like to kick us off, followed by Rachel, followed by Marcy?
Happily, happily. My name is Angela Vigil. I'm so proud to be here on behalf of Baker McKenzie. I get to lead the pro bono work of Baker McKenzie, a law firm all around the globe, which focuses in lots of different areas, but today very much focused on this topic. I am a white woman in my mid 50s on a bright orange screen with glasses, and I am a very excited supporter of Disability 500. I use the pronouns she and her, and am delighted to pass it over to Rachel.
Hello, and very greetings from a hot and sunny Brighton. My name's Rachel Haynes, and I'm the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Manager at Nestlé. I am also a white woman in her mid 50s, wearing glasses and a black top. And my pronouns are also she and hers. Nice to see you all.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marcy Roth. I am the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the World Institute on Disability. I am an older, white, and proudly disabled woman in July and every month. So happy to be here with the Valuable 500 and everybody who's joining us.
Thank you, everyone. So I am going to come to Angela first, but of course, at any point, this is a rich and important conversation. So do come in at any point. But Angela, if I can direct the first question to you, um, what gap do you feel the index fills, and why did this require the scale of pro bono effort that it did?
Well, because the world is a big place, and laws are different in this on these issues in every single jurisdiction. So we were really excited to not just have Baker McKenzie work on this, but in service to Valuable 500 to recruit lawyers who are in in-house legal departments at companies around the world to join us and as their pro bono service help us do this research on different jurisdictions, answering the questions, the same questions in every jurisdiction, but really basic questions. So I'm happy to say it was a labor of love, not necessarily done by experts, although we had lawyers and legal professionals, all kinds of different stripes from all over the world, but not necessarily experts in this area of disability law. So everyone learned as we went. And we were focused very much on making sure we could answer, most importantly, questions about the basic definitions of where we are as a snapshot in 2025 and 26 of what the definitions of disability really mean and whether they are as broad as they should be. Really, whether the law is catching up with the world, which is always a question in the space around public service and social justice issues of all kinds and with all vulnerable populations. But with this population being so big and so prominent and so much a part of all of our business worlds, it seems particularly important that not only does the law catch up with what we understand about disability, but also that but everyone knows it. So I'm proud to say a lot of the volunteers who worked on this project learned a lot themselves, became more knowledgeable about how disability is defined, places where there's gaps where we need to do some catching up on disability being defined in the law as it is in real life, and just a lot of interest in the area by over 350 volunteers with almost over 1,400 hours of work to try to bring this to life and deliver it to Valuable 500.
I mean, it's such an incredible amount of work. And touching on what you were saying there, Angela, what surprised the team the most in working on this, whether it be sort of the jurisdictions or the definitions or the case studies? Was there anything that was surprising?
I think we heard back from our volunteers that people were surprised in a positive and less positive way on this question, the very second one in the index, which is, does the definition of disability include neurological disabilities, mental health, sort of the kinds of disabilities we can't see? And I think some volunteers were happily surprised to see how advanced the laws are in considering that in definitions in some countries, and then others very disappointed in just not seeing that acknowledgement in these definitions. Now, mind you, this project was about defining and sort of setting a basic information about maybe what some of the basic cases or important laws are in this area, but didn't go past that to talk about how that should apply to, say, a company that's trying to understand if they're meeting the expectations of the law. We didn't even go that far. This is just general information. No online source should give advice, of course. So it's just information, but that information is uneven. And it's surprisingly uneven. I think sometimes lawyers assume that in countries, more developed countries, laws will be more developed, and perhaps in less developed countries, they'll be less developed. And this unevenness doesn't track that way. It's just some laws have caught up and some laws really haven't. So we all learned about gaps. And then we all learned about places where there's some nice models to think about complete definitions and what's happening in the disability space, which probably corresponds to great advocacy by organizations, NGOs, civil society organizations, really informing the public, like World Institute on Disability, and also corresponds with the interests of the business community to not only look at the bare minimum definitions, but think about how they can support populations of people with disabilities in models like Nestle on this call and other companies who've really said, we don't want to just meet our bare minimum standards in the law. We want to think about how it is that we are strongly supporting this community because it's a value to us in our business life. And I was surprised by how much our volunteers really talked about that aspect of it in their reflections on their work, and in how much they appreciated the fact that so many of them work, and this is not planned, Sarah, but are part of companies that are members of Valuable 500. And so they are very much up to speed about thinking about disability for their communities and understanding the value that it brings to their business bottom line.
Well, you've beautifully segued into a point that I want to come on to about compliance and this being a framework rather than being the ceiling of where companies should use it. But focusing on that area then, how do you think legal teams and HR teams should actually use the index on a day-to-day basis?
A great question. I think the answer is it's a start. It's like opening the book, right? It's a way for people to become more knowledgeable about the basic state of the law, but only the basic state of the law. So if I'm a company, an HR department, or the in-house lawyers for a company, or just the C-suite and executives of a company, and I want to think about how to apply this to my ongoing activities, then I need more than just the index, right? The index is just a start. I need to talk to counsel and think about putting my resources to understand what I'm obligated under laws across different jurisdictions to do, and then who we want to be. Laws are bare minimums, right? We talk about this in the constitutional setting in the United States all the time. What is barely constitutional is not necessarily what is designed to have communities thrive, and it doesn't always satisfy the true nature of sort of human rights. It's just barely what that law says is required. So I would hope, and I've certainly seen signs of from the volunteers and organizations that we've worked with, that this is a start. You begin to understand what definitions are there, and then you go out and think about what it is that the company wants to stand for, how it is those definitions differ in the different places that they operate, and what would be a the message that you want to send worldwide about the work that you're doing. But starting with a good definition is always what any law school professor will tell you to do. And that's what this index gives everybody, the first page.
Brilliant. Well, I imagine that Marcy and Rachel will also want to revisit this particular topic within the topic. But last question to you then, Angela. What do you think the index means for the next decade of disability inclusion and accountability?
You know, I am excited by this notion that we measure what we value and we value what we measure. And so the value of seeing countries and jurisdictions across, in this case, 100 jurisdictions and soon to be more, because we're still working on pro bono work in this space. Seeing those really shines not only great examples, but gaps. And so I am hopeful that having a resource where anybody can look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, how come these 5 jurisdictions have this, but right there in that neighborhood, there's a jurisdiction that has not included in its definitions of disability this aspect of mental, emotional, and just sort of non-physical disability, that it'll help raise the bar and have countries sort of look to their neighbors and say, we would like to catch up. We know from all of our work in public international law and human rights law and general rule of law work that the greatest influence on countries to change what their laws are is to look to the countries around them that they think they're comparable to. That doesn't necessarily mean geographically next door. That just may mean in the globe, we compare ourselves to these couple of countries. And so now there's a resource that they can compare to those other countries and say, hey, I think we're falling short here. Let's think about that. Now, of course, hopefully that leads to a system that's built around not just accommodations, but actually just universally open to all. But laws aren't built that way. Systems and governments and communities are built that way. So the laws have to catch up so that they can support that kind of change. And then hopefully that change comes next.
I mean, for me, that's one of the beautiful things about the index is the comparisons that you can make and looking at the regions by comparative framework. So thank you, and thank you for the collaboration and work on this because it's been epic and it's been a joy to work with you. So I'm going to pull Rachel in now, and talking about Nestle. How did Nestle first engage with the index, and what have you learned from using it?
So before I answer this, I just want to tell you a little bit about Nestle. So we are a huge, complex beast. We operate in 185 countries with our own legal systems, definition of disability and cultural context. So we have several thousand premises across the world, 270,000 employees in manufacturing, retail, and offices, which makes us one of the top 30 largest employers in the world. So when we were kind of trying to create a roadmap that's ambitious enough for our more mature markets, but also accessible for our less ones, that was a real challenge for us. So the first global step we took was to create a global guidance on disability inclusion. So obviously there were things happening in markets outside of that, but that was our first real global step. And it outlines the business case, roles and responsibilities, KPIs, and the impact that we were trying to make. But to sit alongside that guidance, I created an implementation toolkit which had just loads of resources to inspire, but also to help those markets where they didn't know where to begin, and there were a few of them. And these resources are a mix of internal and external best practices. So we use materials from reputable organizations like Purple Space and the International Labour Organization, and obviously the valuable 500. And this is where we published the index internally. And then to answer your second bit of that question, for me, what I learned was that the legal and cultural context is even more complex than I thought. So, for example, I hadn't previously fully appreciated the importance of separating out mental health and neurodiversity from disability. But I can see that from the index, that these categories are treated quite differently in some countries. And that means that our global tools have to be flexible enough to allow for local adaptation based on local law and culture, while still trying to achieve the same objectives that we've set out globally. And that balance is always tricky.
Brilliant. I mean, you've just touched on something that I was gonna go on to talk about, and which is why it matters and why the index matters. And the changing and evolving definitions of disability globally. So it's a fast-paced legal landscape, and neurodiversity, mental health, well-being is all being included, and it is changing and it is complex. And I think you've touched on my next question, really, Rachel. I was going to talk to you about practical changes that Nestle implemented, but really, did the index prompt any particular conversations across the team?
So what it helps do is our markets to understand their local context and to inform their action planning in a really evidence-based, granular and holistic way. So one of the things that we've created is our own self-assessment tool for markets to help understand their maturity on disability inclusion. And so this is one of the reference points that we use to help them do that. So they have to create their own working group and go through a kind of 5-chapter self-assessment, but it means that they are operating from the basis of real understanding of the detail, the legal context in which they're operating. And so I have gone round to probably most of the markets, if not all of them at different times. And I can't know the detail for every single country where we operate. But when I check in with the markets, I will use the index alongside other country-specific data that I've got. And then it means that we can help them shape their plans and direct them to the actions that they need to take most locally. So it's an iterative process. So it informs that conversation.
So, sort of diving a little bit deeper into that, has it helped with quotas at all? Because quotas is quite a difficult thing for companies to navigate, and especially regionally. Have you got any insight on how it might have helped with quotas?
Again, it's that sort of level of detail. So, obviously, if you want to know if you're going in the right direction, you need to have data. And one of those data points was whether or not we are meeting or not meeting the quotas where we have footprint. And we hadn't had that level of visibility globally before. And as we have, a strong compliance mindset at Nestle, it did galvanize action. And so again, we were trying to have that level of conversation with our markets about where there are quotas. And I found the index really interesting because it really showed the diversity of the quotas and the penalties. So I know from having gone around our markets, there's a points-based system in Japan. You look at days worked in Peru, and it's on a per site per month basis in Germany. And so what the index gave me is an overview of the quota system so that I can effectively support and track progress in this area. So we're trying to find ways of clear data to track. And because some penalties are paid to the state, some go to NGOs, some support people with disabilities and social placements, like what is the actual cost? And that helps me get a clearer picture. But I do also want to make sure that at this point, we're not approaching this as a compliance exercise. The outcome is inclusion rather than meeting of the quotas. But it's a useful data point to say, are we improving over time? What is the gap between the number of people that we need and how many we've got?
And lastly, I just wanted to ask you, because Nestle are doing such fantastic work in this, and you are advanced in what you're doing, but do you have any advice for organisations that are just starting? I'd love to love to get your perspective on that.
I always have advice on this. So first of all, establish a baseline. So you need to understand the level of maturity of the countries where you're operating. So there is a tool that the International Labour Organization, it's a long mouthful, the Global Business and Disability Network self-assessment tool. You can access that, but I'll also happily share ours if anybody wants to get in touch. So find out where you're meeting quotas and add a question on disability to your employee survey if you are legally allowed to. And I'm sure many of you watching will have been asked the question about the costs of hiring people with disabilities and the costs of, workplace adjustments, or the perception that people with disabilities are less productive or off sick more. The employee survey and the quota exercise provided us with really clear costs, direct and indirect, of not including people with disabilities. And so the penalties that you pay, or the additional costs of recruitment if attrition rates are higher, like it all adds up. So that was really helpful, having that sort of baseline. Secondly, create a global framework with your ambition and set out who is responsible for delivering each aspect, and have global principles. So, your commitment to the Valuable 500 is a useful, at least top level framework there. And one of the things that I would really strongly advise is to consult widely on this document before you finish it. So key markets, corporate affairs, procurement, marketing, and obviously legal. And this level of consultation means you get in buy-in from the stakeholders early, the ones who will implement it. And you also get different perspectives from different parts of the business, so you catch potential issues early. And then the final piece is use the lived experience of colleagues to tell the story of disability. So I find that people have a very narrow view of what disability means, and they think in the abstract. And the more that you can help people to meaningfully connect, the more likely they are to feel disability confident and to act and lead inclusively. And that's why I speak out about having a disability at work as much as I do, is because I help tell that story.
Rachel, thank you. It's always a joy to have you. And thank you for sharing your perspective. I'm going to bring Marcy in now, but as I said, everyone, it's a really important and rich conversation. So anything you want to add in. But Marcy, if I can bring you in now. From a global disability rights perspective, what do you feel the significance of this index, of this resource is?
Well, let me begin by thanking you and Valuable for including the World Institute on Disability. We're a 43-year-old disability-led organization. We work in more than 130 countries. We help companies translate their commitments into practice by partnering with business leaders to build sustainable disability inclusion strategies. This includes advising on accessibility and universal design, disability inclusive employment practices, leadership development, emergency preparedness and resilience, procurement, product and service design, and stakeholder engagement. Our approach focuses on embedding disability inclusion into business operations and decision-making from the outset, helping organizations to reduce their risk, strengthen their performance, expand their market reach, and create lasting organizational change. So the index is especially significant because it creates some new and real transparency. For the first time, employers, employees, advocates, investors, and policymakers have a single accessible resource that allows them to understand and compare disability legislation across more than 100 jurisdictions. The transparency can drive accountability. But I think what excites me most is that the index reflects a broader global shift. Across many countries, disability is increasingly being understood through the lens of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, not as a medical condition, but as the interaction between people and the barriers that society creates. That's an important evolution because it really moves the conversation from fixing us and curing us to removing the barriers that keep us apart. The index tells us what government expects, and now it's up to all of us to turn compliance into real success in every community.
Thank you, Marcy. So, just to sort of touch on what you were saying there about accountability and the index, yeah, how do you see that for the agenda for business and the index relating to accountability? Could you elaborate on that for us a little bit more?
Yeah, sure, Sarah. The laws establish the floor, definitely not the ceiling. Compliance matters. It protects rights and reduces legal risk, and it creates some consistency across jurisdiction. But compliance alone has never and will never create inclusion. Real accountability means asking a different set of questions. Are disabled people represented in leadership? Are our products and services accessible by design? Are we hiring, retaining, promoting, investing in disabled talent? Are disability-owned businesses part of the supply chain? Are disabled people helping shape the decisions that affect them and the whole community? Business leaders leading in the next decade aren't going to be the ones asking, what do we have to do? They'll be asking, what can we achieve when everyone can fully participate?
I mean, couldn't agree more. In terms of where we're sort of positioning the index and talking a lot about compliance and the fact that this is a framework and a resource, it's not the ceiling. In terms of meaningful disability inclusion beyond compliance, is there anything else that you wanted to add on that? Because it's such an important piece that it's not just about compliance.
So glad you asked. So, meaningful disability inclusion begins long before somebody asks for an accommodation. It means embedding accessibility and universal design across workplaces, technology, products, services, communications, customer experiences, procurement, and organizational culture right from the beginning. Universal design reduces barriers for everyone and often reduces the need for individual accommodations. That means organizations can focus more of their time and resources on providing effective accommodations when they're truly needed. At WID, we help a lot of organizations make that shift, from treating accessibility as a compliance exercise to treating it as a business imperative. We partner with companies to embed disability inclusion into their leadership, their innovation, workforce development, procurement, product design, emergency preparedness, continuity of operations, long-term organizational planning. The result isn't simply greater compliance, it's stronger business performance, broader market reach, better talent outcomes, greater resilience, and more innovation. Win, win, win across the board.
Oh, Marcy, thank you. I am gonna ask a few more questions to the group and bring everyone in, But just to say to anyone who's attending, if you want to put your questions in the chat, please do come forward and we'll do our best to answer them. But Angela, Rachel, and Marcy, I'm going to pose some questions, so do jump in here. What's the single most important thing that you would like anyone attending or anyone accessing the index to do after this webinar? I'm going to pick on you, Angela.
No problem. We're all trying to be nice to each other. Um, well, first of all, the index is an evolving source, right? So one of the things I think would be really helpful, especially with people with noted interest and expertise that are listening in or accessing this recording, is to give feedback to Valuable 500 if you see things that need updating in that index all the time. Laws are supposed to be updated and evolving, and hopefully they'll continue to evolve in the right way in this space. So as people are looking at it and saying, hey, I think there's a new things that are going on in jurisdiction X, we all want to know that, and we all want to keep the index up to date. But I think the second thing is to think about what other resources people need to launch these campaigns internally and externally. We heard Rachel talking about, great efforts and really organized efforts under her leadership in this space inside a gigantic company that's such a great model for others. We've also heard from smaller companies that just sharing more of those models helps them advocate internally as well and manage up. So I think sharing great examples is really important around the business community, so that those folks that have less great examples internally have somewhere to wave to their own teams and saying, look what Nestle's doing, or look at how this is being used. And so if we can, one, keep updating that index, but also two, thinking about what other resources do people need, so that we can find ways to make those available between the organizations here, but also all of our friends and colleagues around sort of this whole social justice area.
Thank you, Angela.
I'm gonna cheat and give you two. So first of all, I kind of think that it's important to obviously to go and check the index, but like to look at it with a view of what action can it stimulate where I work. So what are the gaps that you need to close? How can it help with your advocacy? So have that sort of mindset on. And then the second bit is work with your local business and disability network, if there is one in your country, because using the index as the sort of guidance and the advocacy tool that you can use, but working collaboratively with other organizations. And that means, big organizations like my own can really help support smaller organizations on their disability and inclusion journey locally. So I think for me, it's like working in collaboration. And that's one of the things that I love most about the disability community, is how collaborative and generous we are. So, my self-assessment tool is partly based on the ILO's self-assessment, but also partly based on Coca-Cola's Euro-Pacific partners. I think that's the right name, their tool. So we use that as the basis for the work that we did. We tailored it to Nestle, but we are all, very, very generous. And I think working locally can really make a big difference. So those are my two.
And I'll jump right in. This is Marcy speaking. I would suggest that people use the index as the beginning of a conversation, not the end of the conversation. If the question is, are we legally compliant? Can you also ask, are we designing our business so disabled people can fully participate? As your employees, your customers, your suppliers, your innovators, your leaders. And then the second piece that is really important, and I want to double down on what everybody else has said, we really see businesses most successful when they're partnering with disability-led organizations and people with disabilities. WID has a huge number of independent user testers that many companies are bringing in to help them get not just the business employee understanding or the business community understanding, but the understanding from that independent voice of folks who have lived experience, who are in a position to give the real, unvarnished input that can be so valuable to companies in their bottom line. I think we as community leaders, and there are many disability-led organizations across the globe. We work with them in over 130 countries. These are the folks who can really complement what you're doing in the business community and with your business and disability community leaders to really get to the customer perspective, to get to the perspective of the folks who might become your employees, who might one day run the country, just saying. I think, compliance manages risk. Inclusive design creates opportunity, innovation, and long-term business value.
Marcy, can I come in? We've had a really lovely question come in, and it sort of builds on what you were just saying. So it's from it's anonymous. Sorry. How do you encourage businesses to measure success beyond legislation and indicators that they should be looking at? So how do we go beyond compliance? And I think you've covered a lot of that just now, but yeah, just covering off that question and tackling that specifically.
Yeah. So, I think if you're looking at this only from a box ticking perspective, if you're only looking at how many lawsuits you've either dodged or won or have been, able to avoid, you're missing the point. And the point is there are 1.3 billion people with disabilities across the globe. By the way, the numbers are much higher than that, but whatever. We are also, family members, employers, employees, friends, who also have an important perspective. And you are very frequently leaving our money on the table if you're not finding ways to make sure that whatever your business is, that we as disabled people, as friends and family, see you as worth our investment. You're leaving our money on the table, and we want to support businesses that see us, that are usable by us, and that we might envision ourselves or our family members working for at some point. So, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Marcy.
And and I can add to that a little bit as well, and that's where for internally adding a question on disability to your employee survey gives a much richer picture of the experience of people with disabilities compared to those without. So for me, looking at the gaps where they are, and that varies quite a lot in different markets. So I can see it in every single market where we added the question. I can compare and contrast and understand the sort of broader DE&I inclusion landscape in that, both in that particular bit of the business, but also in the country where they operate. And then we have consumer insights, which help shape our consumer offering. So what are our products looking like? And so getting that disability perspective voice in our consumer insights is really important as well. So I think it's about listening to what people are telling you. So actively seeking out that input, that insight, and then it's shaping what you deliver, because we're a consumer organization. So if we are not creating the products that people want, if our website isn't accessible so people can't apply to jobs, or if we're not inclusive enough, then we lose our disabled talent, then we lose. So it's about creating an environment where our business wins and people thrive.
I just wanted to add that I found one of the most fascinating presentations actually at Valuable 500's Tokyo gathering was the wonderful remarks by the head of Gallaudet University, making your exact point, Marcy, right? This is an economic reality. There's over 1 billion people, and we all know that's too low. At 15% of the world's population, and we all know that's a low estimate. And it's just bad business to leave that big of a consumer population and a potential employer and supporter population out of consideration. I also find it really amazing because my world is in working with volunteers, and the things that drive people's passion about these issues are, certainly driven by your own perspective on what you bring to the world, but it's also driven by the people that you love. So I can't tell you how many people, for example, when we did this particular project first got started, sent notes over to my pro bono team saying, I'm so glad we're doing this. I have and then insert cousin, son, child, friend, neighbor, sister, and that despite the fact that I think many of us in our different capacities think that we are open and welcoming and, talking about people with disabilities is absolutely part of the furniture and no one would ever feel like they weren't being spoken to. It is very clear to me that if I receive responses like that just by introducing a pro bono project, somebody just felt spoken to for the first time on this issue. And you sort of can't talk about it enough. And of course, this is true for different vulnerable population sectors in so many different ways, no matter how you define it around the world. And my pro bono work really does take me to all different continents on that front. There is a necessity to name a population and to name a group to make sure that you are saying, just in case it's not 100% clear, this door is open and it's open to you, and let's describe you, which I think is why your Valuable 500 should be so applauded for seeking out the creation of this resource to begin with, because it starts with saying what disability is and what disability should be, right? Definitions start that conversation. But I also wanted to echo what Marcy, you said about this is just a start, right? The index, of course, is a start, but just definitions are just a start. Then it should be some self-reflection. And I know there's been some great questions. We've seen some anonymous questions as well, really challenging how difficult the job is to do that for a company. Rachel, maybe in response to your great comments about how hard it is, because so much of disability policy inside a company is based on people identifying to begin with. And we've talked a whole lot about identifying invisible disabilities, but it seems to me like it's a great applaud that we are at the point where we're talking about that finally now in 2026, when this is nothing new. But we need to be talking about it more, because there's still I'm sure when people saw the name of this webinar, their immediate thought was physical disability. And of course, that's a huge part of disability, but not nearly all of it. That challenge of identification must be really difficult.
Well, to touch on that, Angela, the questions that come in are around self-disclosure rates and also intersectional experiences. And Rachel, because you were talking about practical approaches and how Nestle has actually approached this, in terms of joining the dots with things like self-disclosure and legislation, do you have any insights that you could share that would potentially answer some of these questions about companies when their self-ID rates are low, how you actually then think about tackling legislation and sort of legal quotas and that kind of aspect?
So I think so there are sort of two different sort of ways of approaching this. So the data is telling you different things. So the quoted data is telling you who has formally gone through some sort of certification process to meet the local definition of disability and that you can demonstrate that to the government. So that will be, highly specific to that country. So, Spain and Italy both use percentage-based definitions, but it's a lower percentage in Spain. So you might meet the definition in Spain, but not meet the definition in Italy. But it hasn't changed the barriers that you face, whether you should get any accommodations at work. So the data exercise is actually a relatively small part of the work that we're doing on disability. It is not the objective. The objective is to make sure that we are hiring disabled talent and retaining them and developing them. And so for me, the more important bit is the more rich data that we get from the employee survey, because then we get a better understanding about the issues that they're facing. And then the sort of third piece to that is you need a reason to want to share if you have a disability. So there are two reasons where you might wish to share. That's because you feel safe to do so. And the other reason is because you might get something that helps you perform your job better if you get that. So we've just created global guidance on workplace adjustments, which has a set of global principles. And then our markets have to introduce, if they don't already have one, a process for managing workplace adjustments based on the global principles. So we haven't defined disability. It's not just for people with disabilities. It might be if you're a caregiver or if you're a parent, there are all sorts of other reasons why you might want to have workplace adjustments. So we don't use disability as that, but we have said it has been designed with people with disabilities, critical health conditions, etc., in mind, but it's not exclusively for them. And so there are times when you want to use a definition. We use the UN definition of disability as our working global definition, but obviously local law supersedes all of that. So it's really about what is your objective. If your objective is to understand better what your disabled talent is feeling and the barriers that they're facing, then that's understanding the data coming from the workplace adjustments scheme, and it's also understanding from the employee survey. But if your objective is to understand what are the opportunity costs that you get from not achieving it, and also often it is a big number, or it is quite surprising for senior leaders to find out that we are not compliant. It's been, Nestle is very sort of compliance focused. So the idea that we weren't compliant, although obviously we pay any penalties that we need to, was quite a surprise. And so I think for me, it's using that as one part of the armory to make your case, rather than it being the objective or the driver of it.
Thank you. Rachel, we have one final question in the chat, but I am conscious of time. And the question is around a siloed approach. And I would say that the index gives a wonderful resource to think about joining the dots regionally for a global perspective. And it's something valuable, actually, we're working on it. And if that person wanted to reach out, I could talk to them more about that. But in terms of companies looking at global strategy, global approaches, and taking regional perspectives and actions, and I think that's where the index supports that approach beautifully. So I am going to pause there. Thank you everyone for the questions. Angela, I'm going to hand back to you because I know you've got a couple of slides to talk through. But really, just to say thank you to Angela and Marcy and Rachel. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And particularly to Baker McKenzie for all the collaboration and pro bono work that's gone into this index because, and I know I'm biased, but it really is a fantastic resource. So thank you all for your time. Everyone, thank you for attending. Angela, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much. I know that because I've seen some notes while we've started that there are not only many of you on who worked on this project, both at Baker McKenzie, but also outside of our firm who came in and joined us and said, we want to volunteer from the in-house legal department community. So thanks again to everyone. I also saw notes that there are people listening that are sitting in rooms with groups of colleagues to experience this today. So really glad to do that and hope that leads to more conversations about more pro bono work and more work in this space in particular. If you are a lawyer in the United States listening in and you'd like continuing legal education credit, you can get that by taking your phone to the screen right now and showing the QR code that's on the screen. But for those that are unable to do that, there is a code that you would have to provide to your local bar in different formats for different states. And I will state that code out loud. It is letter capital B, number 0, number 7, number 0, number 8, number 2, number 6. So that's BB070826. And there's also on screen a tiny URL that you can go to get information about the CLE code, the continuing legal education codes. And that's at https:// tinyurl. So tinyurl.com. And then there's one more / and it says index CLE. So capital I index in honor of the Global Disability Index and CLE, capital C, capital L, capital E for continuing legal education. Anyone who's attended the webinar can apply for that continuing legal education on their own. And for anyone for whom I spoke too quickly, there'll be a thank you email sent out to all folks who registered with this information, as well as access to the recording, which was a question earlier on. If you're interested in continuing the conversation in all kinds of different directions, we have a slide about a different way that you can do that. We got this work done originally as part of our Justice in Action pro bono efforts. And so we're doing another one of those in October. It won't be on this disability project, but there will be other social justice, rule of law, and access to justice projects. We welcome lawyers from other companies around the world to come and join us on any of those. And the dates are on the screen, October 27, 28, 29, or you can write us an email to justice.inaction@bakermckenzie.com. But there's more work to do certainly in this space. And as Sarah said, this is Pride Month, Disability Pride Month. So I want to welcome people to see information about the World Institution on Disabilities event that's coming up tomorrow, right, Marcy? There's
Exactly.
You can go to World Institute on Disabilities website. You can go to Marcy's LinkedIn to see information, but you will see information about an event coming up just tomorrow. And Marcy, can you tell us those details real quick?
Sure, happy to. The G20 has a number of engagement groups that focus on issues that are important for the G20 to be considering. And we at the World Institute on Disability have been leading this year's D20 efforts. That's the Disability 20 to the G20. And tomorrow we're going to be sharing some outcomes from an important survey that's underway. Please join us.
There's more information about that in the chat, but I guess our summary to everybody is thank you for joining this episode of our Talking Impact, Talking Justice series from Baker, but also from Valuable 500. What we really hope this is the beginning of the conversation. And thanks to you, Sarah, I'm sure it will be.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.